Hello there. So I was recently digging through some of my old cabinets and found a special book I hadn't seen in who knows how long due to my love-hate relationship with the story itself. Honestly, I could keep reading it until another eternity passes by, but the twists always seem to sneak up on me no matter how I approach the pages, which need to be read. Perhaps there are more mystical properties which I'm failing to acknowledge, but either way I'm sure you'll find this somewhat entertaining at the least. Maybe you'll even discover what dragged me in to begin with also. At the end of the day, who doesn't like a good story with a peculiar outcome to keep you guessing, if not questioning, far after it has concluded? Our tale begins in Nether Ridge, where a race known as the Netherians reside, being that of humans who got trapped in the dark depths of that twisted dimension and got forced to adapt to the red rocks that kept them captive. It's hard to tell how long they had been thriving in that world for, but the book came with a sketch version of an average Netherian. It makes me wonder if this is more than just a story actually. Nonetheless, they had managed to turn such an inhabitable place into a world worth surviving in, with towns built of reeds, bricks and sintonite to give a sense of familiarity to that back on the surface. Not like the newest generation knew this, as those of the past had taken the history with them at this point due to how they had focused more on survival than documenting what they knew of the world they would struggle to return to. It would be this yearning for survival which helped them become more inclined to rely on unconventional methods such as alchemy, where potions and enchanting became a necessity with how useful they proved to be. Of course, living with the piglins for so long meant they would pick up on the tricks sooner or later, and as the trading got more advanced, it became a gateway into hauling in mass amounts of hard to gather items such as obsidian. However, the Netherians would eventually grow restless with their living conditions to the extent of doing things like building structures to pass the time or expanding their reach further into the Nether Ridge to try discover something new. Eventually, they did. The shack wasn't much, if not hastily built around a strange obsidian rectangle with minimal amounts of interior being present too. Whoever had been here made this box to protect this peculiar gateway which pulsated with a purple glow and echoed a set of sounds to the small group that had come across it. Having never seen something like this before, they gutted the shack of everything they could but left the portal untouched in order to go through when better prepared. The group eventually returned home to their town to relay what was happening next, and soon enough they began to pack food, weapons, tools or armor and crossed over to the other side where they were greeted with valleys of pure green. Though this was after they had busted through the iron bars which caged the gateway, but it seemed just so peaceful in comparison to their home just on the other side. Upon declaring the land safe, if not for the big ball of light in the sky which hurt their eyes, they quickly set up a camp made of sturdy materials to block out any threat that tried jostling into their space. Block after block, house after house, they built to no end until everything was sturdy enough to last a long while when establishing themselves more permanently. Again, time would pass, but not without a constant presence over them, which left a sense of paranoia in the Netherians, though it wasn't the new pest they feared since they managed to kill them off easily. Whatever was watching them did so with a level of intelligence that these mobs lacked. It would take one of the newcomers a moment, but they eventually broke off from the larger group to do some spying of their own, and found where this stalker came from, as a village, far bigger than the little camp, sat atop a hill which snaked down to the river crossing. The spy could see so many people interacting and enjoying themselves, just like they had done with their own people, with the visible similarities being enough to ping something in their mind. They retreated hastily to spread the news, and, once again, the travelling party would visit the village, but dared not to cross the bridge, which went over the river, hoping to do this peacefully, knowing that conflict would have them heavily outmatched. With enough time, what seemed to be the village's leader travelled down the hill, accompanied by two others wearing armour that had a silver glint to them, and certainly looked more durable than the golden pieces of their own. Ravelka, seemingly the head of the travelling party, made himself vulnerable and open when speaking with the village leader, who did the same as a mutual respect began to form as words were exchanged. Understandably, not much besides basic rules were established between the two groups, with further discussions to be held in the future when they felt comfortable to progress into a further ruling. Just like that, they split away as a new connection was formed. After the original encounter, it took a couple of weeks to really give it some forethought on what to do next, as the Netherians and the Overworldians were on passive grounds, so it would be about proving their worth to actually get a good standing past being neutral to one another. In the meantime, the camp had started to improve until being the city of Nashkavidil, where the newcomers had started to properly get a grip on what the surface life was like now. On one occasion, during a meeting between the two groups, the mention of alchemy was brought up by the Netherians, and that they were willing to help teach them how to enchant or brew potions in exchange for resources that they didn't have a proper way of gathering easily yet. Obviously, the prospect of furthering their advancements only drove the Overworldians to accept such an offer, and soon they had a proper road connecting the two into an agreement which led to the quick development of both places. The Netherians made a kingdom far superior to the home they had abandoned in the Nether Ridge, and the Overworldians tripled their offense and defense with the new abilities given to them. But the village leader, they were growing somewhat concerned, considering the size of the other group compared to their own now, which could be overrun if they waged war or tried to impose some sort of threat over them. To begin with, the thoughts were easy to keep at bay, but the looming figure of the distant kingdom had the fears swell in their mind until they had the justifiable reasons written down on paper and handed out to those of their community. Fear was the driving factor in all of this, so they took to their leader's command almost instantly when the proposition of war became tangible. The second in command had gotten to thinking of potential plans to easily take out the smaller camps that lined the way to the kingdom's entrance, which is when the notion of using their own alchemy was brought up. Brews granting invisibility were to be deployed to the party, going out allowing for a swift and unseen attack which could have camps defunct within moments. So, war had officially begun that night, as the darkness provided enough coverage to sneak all the way to the camps before the potions were consumed and the carnage was unleashed. Even with the enhanced hearing, there was no hope for those who stood guard, and it was simply killing cattle when it came to those who were resting within the tents. Black blood smeared the foreign blocks before they advanced onwards to the next camp, then the next, then the next. Then there was nothing but the kingdom itself to handle. It would have been foolish to go in with a small party as it was. So the group laid traps at the camps to give them more time if anyone went looking before hightailing it back to the village. A call to arms was sent out where everyone who was an adult and able to fight was drafted in, whilst those who couldn't handle the chaos would be left behind to tend to the young or help preparation for the following attack. The majority of the village soon huddled up around the fountain where the village leader stood, waiting only to give a rousing speech that sent adrenaline coursing through the veins of those readying themselves for the battle ahead. With dawn creeping over the land, the village leader guided their people through the holes. They blasted through the walls and decimated those who were caught unaware or were too weak to fight back against their overwhelming strength. Everything was going as expected until blurs of rusted grey began to butcher the Overworldians to the point of driving them away lest they be cleaved in two from the raw strength these entities possessed. The village leader felt that war was necessary now, that the Netherians had proven themselves to be hiding such dangerous power behind high walls, out of sight when they were supposed to be transparent to one another, though they severely lacked any sort of method of retaliation now that most of the villagers were lost to these quick monsters of war, so they simply went for the next best thing to counteract such a threat. Long before the village was founded, a relic of the past was uncovered from the ruins of whatever village had been there beforehand, with ancient scripts which took decades to translate. Many perceived it to be nothing but a piece of the past, but the current village leader knew better than to throw out such a potentially powerful set of scriptures. They called upon their remaining forces to bring blocks of darkness to the camps, before having them sprawled out amongst the corpses which had been dragged to form piles of pale death that had begun to decay, though this didn't halt the plans at hand. With everything in place, the second in command began to read from the scroll upon the village leader's direction, as the souls of all that had perished began to channel in the air around them, both as distant screams came echoing from afar. The village leader's chest was torn open, and the orb of souls began to filter their way into the crevice whilst beginning to alter their appearance drastically as a result of this newfound power. The clothing burned away in a blue fury, flesh darkened to a pitch black if not resonating with cyan shade in certain sections, or new parts made themselves known, such as a pair of horns, which dug their way out of their skull. People looked on in horror as the second in command skirted away from their leader, who had been corrupted with some sort of blue infection. No word was spoken as the corpses began to shift and jitter before starting to decay slowly, in order to produce their own kind of infection that failed to give the same appearance as the village leader, but nonetheless brought these fallen Netherians back to life. Those that were still human remained behind it all as the ritual began to show the power it truly held over those under the infection's influence, before directing it all towards the kingdom that was still trying to recuperate from the morning siege. The village leader began to step forward and followed their writhing troops into the kingdom, where more souls were yanked from the strewn corpses that had no time to be moved before they began to lash around once more. Those blurry killing machines that had made short work of the Overworldians before soon became overwhelmed from the sheer amount of hostiles being forced in their direction until they fled, if not dying where they stood. The infection crawled through their armor and into the gaping wounds until they were consumed, whilst the dark matter spread out along the streets or up the sides of empty homes. In moments, the whole kingdom was either abandoned under the infection's influence or was turned into a gooey mush that slowly linked with other piles that had formed. King Ravelka stood firm despite knowing that his kingdom was no longer his, but it didn't mean he would back down so easily, something that the village leader anticipated. There was a moment of hope for the king when he thought there was an opening to attack, but it was a fleeting concept that got shot down as the claws tore through both armor and flesh with ease. A battle was pointless now. The queen went to take her seat atop the glistening throne whilst the former king felt his body swell and the nearby goop latch onto him. Instead of becoming it, or a skinny monstrosity, he rose again a creature with no sense of sight, but the ability to hit everything and anything that crossed the land. Something with thickened appendages that could easily prove destructive, yet was subservient to the queen he now served under, just like the other corpses and humans that had aligned themselves with them. Well, that was simply the prologue to this big old book of mine, but I'm sure I could share more if I find others nagging me to do so, though that's besides the point now considering our time is up. There's plenty more to be uncovered since the war is only beginning, and who knows what could happen after the initial attack on such a place. Could anyone stop this queen and her new rule over the land? Where did the ritual spell even originate from? What happened to those who had deserted the kingdom? All of this and more awaits those who want the truth. You just need to take a seat every now and then. In any case, this has been Skullman Speaks, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully.